Hey everybody, welcome back to another YouTube tutorial. My name's Naomi, and today we'll be taking a look at just adding foliage to our landscape, stuff like grass, trees, rocks. I'm going to be going through how I set up a layered approach for the foliage, and just overall change the culling distance. We'll be using two methods for filling up the landscape of foliage. It's gonna be the one with the node we'll be using that for the grass and small rocks, and for the trees we're gonna be using procedural features in Unreal Engine, which has existed for quite a long time. It's not something new in Unreal Engine, but yeah, we're gonna be using that. And at the end, I have like an extra 10 minutes where I actually go ahead and change a few stuff around. I talk about what is causing some bad performance in UE5 Landscape. It's something to do with the virtual shadow maps, and overall not being able to use nanite on a lot of our foliage, or practically all our foliage. And yeah, that's it. And I know you really want to get into this video, so without further ado, let's get into the video. Okay, so last time we left off, we actually fixed the tiling on our landscape. It was really bad, but at the end, we actually achieved a pretty good result. And I don't really have much to change to this. I would just say I'm quickly going to go ahead and open my M Landscape material. I'd definitely say add a multiply node here, so you can change the blending. So if I add a multiply node between the landscape chords and the UV, that will mean I can actually scale this texture sampler. And this means that 1 will be the scale that it fits the entire landscape, and lower will of course zoom into this texture, and the higher numbers will tile it more. So feel free to do that. Also, I forgot to mention that this texture sampler should be on shared wrap. Remember, every texture sampler we use, we want to set on shared wrap, so we save up on these texture samplers, which you have a limited amount of. And anyway, that's really all for that. So let's actually go ahead and talk about our assets. So here I have Megascans folder, 3D plants. I have big leaf hydrangea, crown beard, field poppy, 2 grass clumps, 1 rose hip, 1 thatching grass, 1 wild grass. It's important to note I might not use every single asset here because that's a lot of plants. But yeah, also I have 1 Japanese mossy boulder and 5 Nordic beach rocks from the Megascans library. And also I have this interactive boost for all this asset. I have the asset on screen. It's totally free on the Unreal Engine Marketplace. The reason why I'm using it is, well, it's 2 reasons. Firstly, it's really high quality, and 2, it's free. Why wouldn't you? Also, it fits our scene pretty well, so I'm going for that. And that's it for the plant. I remember last week I also talked about having 2 grass episodes, or 2 different ways of handling foliage. I talked about this, the node-based approach, and then there's the procedural way. Now I said I was going to make 2 videos, and while I would have loved to make 2 videos, I noticed that that records a disparity or confusion when we actually get farther in the tutorial series, and people wonder why the material graphs are different and stuff like that. So I'm actually going to do both in the same episode. So for the grass, it's going to be using the grass node and also the small rocks. But for the trees, it's going to use the new procedural, well, not really new, but the procedural tools in Unreal Engine. So there are 2 different ways of handling it. The reason why we're not doing the trees on the grass node is because the grass node doesn't add collision to any objects it spawns. But without further ado, let's actually get into it. So the first thing I want to do is actually go ahead and add our grass. So we're going to go to our M Landscape material, go down here. I actually did this as a test, so I'm going to delete that. What you want to do is you want to right click in the material graph, type in landscape grass output. Awesome. And we want to actually get our landscape layer. So we actually have this as a comment. Remember, base layer is usually dirt, layer 1 is usually grass, and layer 2 is usually rock. So I want to use layer 1 because that's where our grass is. So while I could go ahead and get my grass layer from here and just do that. I'm rather gonna go ahead and right click here in the open, type in landscape. You're gonna see this layer sample. And what this does is you actually type in the landscape layer you want and it actually samples. So in the parameter name, we're gonna go ahead and type in layer 1. And that's perfect. Now we can plug that into the grass. We can plug that into the grass output. Awesome. Now we can save that. It's gonna recompile usually, I believe. But something you're gonna notice is our landscape doesn't have grass yet. Now, why is this insert? Well, we didn't actually assign a grass asset. So here at the grass type, we want to click on the none. Then you're gonna see this create new asset landscape grass type. I'm gonna go ahead and create one. I'm gonna call this grass type. Usually you want to apprehend or append it's like the level's name here, so you know which grass type is on which level if you want wildly different grass on each level. But yeah, I'm gonna call this grass type for the simplicity of this tutorial. Now I want to go to my content browser, and I see this now, but also I can still note there's no grass on the landscape. This is why we made this grass asset. We can double click here, and we can see there's a grass varieties button here. So we can actually add multiple varieties, but let's start off by just adding basic grass. So we're gonna go ahead, add new index with the plus, drop down the index, and now we're going to see there's a grass mesh option. So here we can go ahead and type in our grass. Now I'm going to be using grass clumps variety 1. I usually like the grass clumps assets, but you can choose whatever grass you want. And now I can go ahead and save. And now you're probably wondering, oh wow, there isn't any grass on my landscape. This happens sometimes, right? Like if you've checked that your grass output node is correct here and that. This happens sometimes. Sometimes it isn't dumb compiling. You can usually boot up your game and check if that works. Sometimes you have to go ahead and reload a new map. So I'm going to create a new level. Go boot into that. I'll save the selected world. Go ahead, go back to my new map. And then it should start loading the foliage, and sometimes it just takes a while to show. I know it's a bit horrible, but it's just one of the downsides I've seen with the grass type. But you'll see it will start up pretty soon. In fact, I'll cut to when it actually does. Oh, I accidentally note I didn't actually save and apply, even though it seems my landscape material was saved. Now the grass will actually load into our landscape. Okay, and here are grasses. Remember, don't think that it's because I actually saved my M landscape material. If you did save your M landscape material and your grass type, and still the grasses, then just reload the level. That usually solves it. But now we're struggling with a new problem, and no, it's not that horrible fading between the billboards and this grass. I'm gonna talk about fixing that in the next part of this tutorial series. But there's way too much grass. In fact, if I go ahead, go from my lit viewpoint to my wireframe, you can notice that close up it's almost completely blue. So there's really a lot of polys. You can even see further away the billboards. That's very high poly, and it's not really good. So what we want to do is we want to reduce the density. So you want to go ahead and go to your content folder, go to grass type, and reduce the density. But even if we reduce it something like 100 and 1100, you actually see it update live. Now our grass looks patchy and it doesn't really look too good. Now, this is interesting, right? So how do we make our grass seem very dense but don't push the poly count too high? Well, I actually found a trick from a YouTube channel called WorldofLevelDesign. I'll have them linked down below. I'd really recommend it. This is not my idea. This is totally theirs. So, if you really want to praise someone for telling you this, go praise them. Go ahead and dock my grass type. What you want to do is we're actually gonna go ahead and scale up grass object, so that it seems like there's more grass, but actually there isn't as much grass as you might think. So let's go ahead and start off with a scale, a uniform scale of 2. We want to make the minimum 1.5 so we get a different variant in our grass. And now our grass just looks way more lively, in fact. So even though we have lesser grass or less grass on screen, it looks like there's way more grass. And if I actually go ahead and go to my wireframe viewport, it looks way better now. But still, we can really push this a bit. Sometimes I like to go ahead and do free scaling. Then what I would do is I'd actually scale the plant on the X value to something like 3, and then scale the Z-axis to something like 2.5, so it isn't too high, but it's still a bit more, has a bit more width to it. So I'm gonna set the minimum to 2.5, the scale to 2.5, and then for the Z, I'm gonna go ahead and put that on a nice little 2. Let's save, and now our grass looks really dense. Remember to just play around with the Z scaling so that your grass blades onto line. In this case, it's more like a tall grass, which I really like, so I'm gonna go for that effect. And the best part is now our grass looks really dense. If I go to my lit wireframe, then the grass isn't really as dense as it was, but it gives that perceived depth of being dense. So what's awesome is we can actually reduce the density down quite a notch. We can do something like maybe 50, and it's still going to look very dense. It's gonna have these patches, but that's totally fine with us. This looks really good, actually. I'm really shocked on the result. If we go down to more grass areas, yeah, this patchiness is totally fine. If you really don't like the patchiness, you can maybe put it to something like 80. That can totally work as well. So if I go here, yeah. So there's a bit more patchiness, but yeah, we've reduced the density. Now the problem is that this has a pretty far view distance. And, well, it might seem like a good idea to make your grass look very dense. If you actually look at games, they do this thing where they layer the landscape grass. So what they do is they have a very dense looking grass up close, but further and further away the density reduces. How do they do that? Well, simple. They actually add multiples of these like the one asset they multiply, and then they have different culling distances for each. So you can see here, here's the start cull and the end cull distance. So what we can do is we can set the start cull distance to something like 2,250 and the end at 1,500. So this means that if I go to my new map, it's really dense up close. So you can see it looks really dense up close. But then what we can do is we can actually go ahead and add more indexes and copy our first index. So copy 0, paste it into 1, and paste it into 2. And this means now we've duplicated our work, which is really cool. And what we want to do now is we want to set the index 1, so the second one, to a value like something like 2,250 in the start, and the end at 2,500. And then we can reduce the density, maybe like something like 50. And then for the third one, we can reduce the density like something like 30. And then have it at a longer view distance. So at 10,000, it will start culling at 9,750. And let's actually see this in action. I still feel like it's a bit too dense further away. Like, it's way too dense further away. So I definitely say let's play with the scaling values. Of course, you can skip the scaling values if you really don't want to go through this. I think let's start off with a beautiful 75, and then we can scale down to 50 in the medium distance, and on something like this, I think we can really reduce it to something way less, like 50, and that's gonna create a pretty nice blend. It's way better now, so we don't render too much grass close up, so we don't have to render so many polys for something that I feel is very unneeded. Foliage can absolutely kill your performance if you're not careful. That's why we're trying to play it safe. I think with medium scaling, I'm gonna put this to 40. You're gonna see me do this commonly in the videos, just play around with values I think will work very well. Now I'm gonna ignore the billboards, of course. I said we're gonna address this in another part where we actually make our foliage look a bit better than it looks now. And yeah, this is really good. Now we actually have to go ahead and add flowers. Now what's awesome is we don't actually have to do the scaling technique or this this distance-based technique. So we don't have to make 3 versions of each object. Because we just want to add a bit of variance, we can actually just go ahead and add a new index. We can choose a certain plant, like so I'll try a field poppy. Let's try variant 14 as example. And the best part of this is you should just go ahead and put in random end cull distances, because if objects randomly cull at different distances, then it gives the illusion, it really just makes your landscape feel unique. It's very hard to explain, but if you actually play around with it, you'll see. So I'm just going to set the start cull at 7,000 and the end cull at 7,500. And you can see there's way too many field poppies, so what I would recommend is I'll just go ahead and reduce the density. Something like 25. And let's actually see this action. Yeah, there's way less. Now, of course, you can also add more variants. So go ahead and add another array element. Then we can actually add another field poppy. And I'm going to go ahead and play around with variant 5 maybe. Set the densities maybe to 20, so different density. The start cull I'm going to put at 800. 8,000 to 8,500, and I can save. And if I go to my new map now there's way more field poppies, and it just looks way more lively. If your performance is very low still, I just recommend playing around with the densities, reduce the density for each of these, find something that really works for you. Now you can add as many plants as you want, and I'd recommend adding a grass, other than the grass you have, so like a thatching grass. I'm gonna go ahead and add variant 1. I'm gonna go ahead and make the density 50, and I'm gonna set this to a culling distance of about the end of the grass. I'd say about we should start culling at 9,750. You can play around with the culling distance to find something you like. I'm actually going to reduce the density because we don't want as much of this grass, because we already have quite a lot of grass. Now this will go ahead and just add variant or variants to our grass. So just add more grass types, play around, don't have the density too high, monitor your performance and check how much density you can get out of this. But the scaling technique and all these poppies and everything should just get you going and starting into making a better landscape. Now let's actually address the bigger problem here. It's not the billboards, we're fixing that in the next episode, but the bigger problem is we don't have any trees. Now how are we gonna add trees? Well, we're actually gonna use the procedural foliage technique I was talking about. So now I'm showing you off both techniques, but in the same video, so you can learn out of both of them. So you can go to, you're gonna have to go to edit at the top left, go to edit preferences, go to experimental, and toggle on procedural foliage. Awesome. Now in UE5 you don't have to restart. I don't know about UE4, I believe you have to do an engine restart there. But now we can actually just go ahead, right click here in the asset browser or the content browser, and we can go to our foliage. We can make a new procedural foliage spawner. We're gonna go ahead and call this our trees spawner. Awesome. Now we're gonna open this up, and now it takes foliage types. So if you want, you can just go ahead and type in tree, but there's a big chance that you're using the assets I'm using, and it doesn't actually have our meshes as trees. So what you want to do is you want to go to meshes, go to full or go to any tree you want. And what you want to do is you just want to right click them all. And what you want to do is asset actions. Actually, no. We're going to go ahead and create a new foliage. What you want to do is we want to actually make a static mesh foliage. If you want to use the interactive script, you can actually go ahead and use an active foliage with the blueprints and all that, but I'm not going to. So what you want to do is rename this to spruce full 01. Okay, spruce full. And this is our static mesh foliage. So actually what you want to do is you want to apprehend F for static mesh foliage. I believe that's the naming convention. And then you can do it 01. And what you can do now is you can open it up and choose our spruce tree that we have. So the spruce full. And there. Now we're ready to go. So if I go to my tree spawner, I can actually go ahead and add my tree. So I can add the spruce full. Awesome. So I could go ahead and save that. Now if I go to my new map and I go to my content folder, I drag the tree spawner in. You're gonna notice it's just a box, and it's a very small box. So what you do is you just want to drag it into your landscape, and you want to scale this to fit our entire landscape. So here in the details panel, you want to scroll down so you see the brush settings. For X, I found something like 2001, 2180,000, 218,000 usually works great. So 218,000 usually produces nice results. And for the Z, I usually do something like 50,000. What you want to do is if you scroll out from your landscape, you just want to go ahead and check that it fits your entire landscape. So I noticed that it isn't at the top, and yeah, it doesn't encompass the entire landscape yet. Okay, so for this is perfect, it encompasses the entire landscape. And now that we actually have our tree spawner here, we can actually scroll down in the details panel and actually resimulate. And now what this will do is this will actually go ahead and spawn in our trees. Now it's actually gonna freeze the editor because yeah. So this is pretty dense, right? And also another problem is it's spawning on rock. And yeah, there's a lot of problems here actually, which we're going to have to address. So let's go to our tree spawner. And while these settings is cool and all, you want to open your SF or the static foliage you made, and you want to scroll all the way down till you see placement. And usually this drop down is available, but you want to click show advanced, the down arrow. There's going to be an inclusion landscape layers. Hit plus, and now you can define which layers this tree will grow on. So what you want to do is you want to type in layer 1, because that's our grass layer. Okay, and here you can set how much of that grass layer it should have before it's considered that it can grow there. So if it's blending a bit, like maybe says it has a blending of 0.1% grass somewhere, it won't work. So here we also want to tick another thing, is align to normal. So something our trees are doing is it's actually growing sideways at steeps, which trees don't. They usually grow upwards. So what you want to do is you actually just want to go to your tree spawner, or not tree spawner, your spruce foliage asset. I want to untick align to normals. Awesome. And this is pretty much it. But what we want to do is scroll all the way. So you're gonna see a few stuff like density, fall off, collision, clustering, and growth. What we want to do is we want to go to clustering. So the number of steps is practically how many years your tree has been growing. And the initial seed density is of course the density of your trees. Now I'm gonna go ahead and set this to something like 0.25. And this should lower our density of those trees a bit, so let's go ahead and resimulate again. It's gonna freeze the editor, and here you can see it's way less dense. So if I actually go ahead and hit play here, it's gonna fall me down. I can see it's way less dense. So it has patches though, which is just a way real world seeds would work and all that. So what you want to do is just want to go to your spruce full and you just want to change the distance of all these, so the spread variance and the average spread distance. And yeah, just play around with this. Also play around with the growth settings, like the max age a tree can get before it doesn't grow anymore. So also important thing to note is trees actually grow. So these trees actually get scaled up and down based on how old of trees or how old the trees actually are. That's just important to note. While this looks really good, we definitely want to get the density a bit up. So the seed density, I'd say something like 0.35 should work. Let's say they grow for about 5 years. The spread distance, I'd say the average should be maybe 100. And the spread variance, it should be fine there. And what we can do now is we can actually hit resimulate for trees. Awesome. And now it has actually simulated the trees, and it's pretty big chunks of tree. Like here, it's way too big, so maybe we want to reduce the density just a small bit. Maybe something like 0.25 again with the extra spread should work. So let's resimulate this. And yeah, now there's way less trees. Remember, you can also set up a culling distance. So in your SF spruce full, if you scroll all the way down, you're going to see a cull distance. So let's set the cull distance pretty high, because we want to see trees from further away. But we don't want them to just render every single tree in our scene. So maybe 15,000 should work. I think we should start blending for 14,500, for example, and hit save there. Because this is a culling distance, this will actually work in real time, so it isn't something we have to hit resimulate for. We're going to go ahead and fall to the ground. And yeah, this looks pretty good actually now. Now, something you can actually do, yeah, this is our culling distance being at play. Actually, maybe I feel like we should push up the culling distance. And now I'm gonna do this quite a lot in the video. It's really just playing around with the settings and finding something you like. So maybe 20,000. I feel like we can handle 20,000 on the epic settings. The minimum should be something like 19,500. Should do it. Now, it's important to note that these are the settings that's going to apply at the highest graphics settings. So if I set the graphics settings higher, the rendering distance is actually gonna be the rendering distance we set here. But if we actually go ahead and reduce our engine settings, so the game settings, then the distance of rendering will actually be changed based on what the settings is, and this is usually with the view distance setting. I usually do record all my videos in high, so that's what I'm aiming for here. So just go ahead, set your engine to maybe the view distance to epic, and play around with the settings you think the player should be messing around with, or the amount of foliage that should be on screen at any time. Okay, now that it's working, I notice here down below that there isn't trees growing, and I think I'm attributing that to the box just not hitting that underpart. So I'm definitely gonna go ahead and go to the tree spawner, and what I would do is I would scale the box something like 70,000 should work. And what you can do now is again resimulate, and let's see how that works. Awesome. So we can see here that it's working pretty well. It's grouped up pretty well. And what's awesome is if you hit resimulate when you paint like a dirt, trees won't grow on dirt because we didn't tell it to grow on dirt. So you can create paths everywhere around here. Of course, like I said, I record my videos usually at high, so I like the settings here. So yeah, this looks really good. And a problem we have now is you might not want trees to grow at a certain place, and that's understandable. So what you can do is you can go to the top left and create, and what you can do is you can get a volume, and there's actually a volume which blocks procedural foliage. So there's a procedural foliage blocking volume. And what you can do is you can actually go ahead and let's scale this up to maybe 1,000 by 1,000 by 1,000. And let's move it here, for example. So what we can do now is if we actually resimulate our tree spawner, it's actually not gonna spawn foliage where we put a blocking volume. So if you want to make a small place where the players can set down, maybe a campfire or something like that, you can use these blocking volumes to stop that. But of course, I want the trees to spawn the way they're spawning, so I'm gonna resimulate it back to where it was. Now this looks really good, but we are missing something, and that is small rocks. Now for big rocks, if you're actually going to go ahead and use big rocks, I would go ahead and use the spawner technique for that. So you're just going to go ahead and add a new foliage, go to your spruce, go to the SF spruce, or not the SF spruce, go to your foliage spawner you're making for the rock, and just play around with the growth settings to make sure that the procedural scale is interesting. Rocks don't grow with age, but the reason why I think this might work is it's automatically going to scale the rock a bit. So if you feel like the rocks are too small here, just play around with the procedural scale and make sure the minimum scale's a bit higher. But now we have that for the bigger rocks. I want to make smaller rocks in between. So for this, I'm still going to use the grass node. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and go to my Landscape material. I'm going to go to this grass node and add a new type. I'm going to drop down, add a new input. I'm going to go ahead and add rocks. I'm going to go ahead and create a new grass type, and it's going to be rocks type. Awesome. And now I'm going to go ahead and double click and open that up. Grass varieties. Then I'm just going to go ahead and add a rock. So I'm going to add a Nordic beach rock, which looks pretty well. I'm going to reduce the density. I don't want as many rocks around, so maybe something like 20 should work. Yeah. And you can play around with the scaling to suit. I think let's have a random scaling, like something like it can scale up 3 times, but it can be a minimum of 1. And we should see if we go to our landscape material that it is missing the input. Now here we would just want to go ahead and drag in our layer 1, so because we're missing that input. And now our rocks will actually go ahead and grow on dirt, which is really good. So, grow on grass, I mean. Not really grow, but be spawned in. Remember, this is sometimes the thing with the grass node. Just make sure that your landscape material is saved, and your rocks type is saved. And if all else fails, remember, just reload the level that usually fixes that. So go to maps, I have a new world specifically saved in this case, so I can open up a blank level, then I can go back to my new map, and then the grass and the rocks will actually go ahead and load it. Okay, and yeah, you can see it. Now, I would say that they're way too dense, so let's go to rocks type. Reduce it something to 5. I feel like that's a pretty good density. And yeah, now there are rocks. Maybe sometimes they're scaled a bit bigger, so just play around with the scaling. Find something you like. And yeah, this looks really good. I'm gonna go ahead and look at how intense the shading is. If something is really dark, like really dark green, which our landscape is, of course. It's not really optimized, but generally you just don't want anything red. Red is very bad. Like, if it's red, you need to do something. Now, of course, we're gonna be talking about shader complexity as we iron out our landscape and make sure that we improve performance. We're gonna be using virtual runtime textures to do that. But that's for the future, of course. But now we have all this sorted. Look at our work so far. So yeah, this looks really good, and I'm pleasantly surprised. This is of course with one tree variant. You can make multiple trees variant. Plug in a tree spawner, add another element, and go ahead and add that. I'm gonna do all of this off camera because it's the same way of doing everything we've done now. You don't really have to care about learning something new. Everything you've done for putting out the grass, the trees, and the rocks is the same. Of course, if you want the rocks in multiple layers, like on the rocks, be at the rocks, you can go ahead and make a new spawner for the rocks and change the rock settings in the foliage spawner. But yeah, that's it for this. So that's it for this. I'm actually just gonna go ahead and skip forward to where I've added multiple stuff and multiple trees and all that cool stuff, and then you can see the end result. Okay, so I have changed a few stuff around. The first thing I really did is I went to my grass type and I went ahead and did adjust the far extenting or the far region of my stuff. I actually made them end at 15,000 and actually start culling at 12,250. I see I didn't do it here. Just quickly gonna do that here. That's what I did for all the far-reaching grass. Of course, the closer ones are from 1,000 to 1,500, and the medium range is from 2,000 to 2,500. Now, something I also did is for all the nearby grass, I actually ticked on cast dynamic shadows, but for everything that was far-reaching, I actually went ahead and turned off the dynamic shadow. You can see this for quite a few objects. But the reason why I'm doing that is because if we actually go ahead and go look in our scene, usually we don't really care about the far extending grass. We only really care about the shadows close up, and further away with a bit of coloring it will actually blend in. But I still want pretty good shadows on the close to medium end, so that's why cast dynamic shadow is on for the low and medium end. And for the trees, I did adjust them. Of course, I added more tree types to the landscape. So I actually went ahead and, of course, made a couple static mesh foliage. One important thing I did do is I actually replaced the normal full versions with a low poly version because I found out while looking through the assets that these marked with low is actually the game ready assets. So every time you're working with a tree here, you want to pick the low version of that specific tree. It still looks really cool if you're looking in game, but of course it's just better performance wise. And something I also did is I actually extended the cull distance to 150,000. I noticed that the trees further away were just imposters, and they rendered pretty well, so I don't really care about pushing trees cull distance very far. Something you also want to do is under collision presets in your static foliage asset, you just want to go ahead and change no collision to block all. That will actually activate the collision for the trees. I didn't do it here, but that's what you want to do. Further than that, I think you might notice, okay, well, insert your viewport's a bit more laggy than usual. What's going on? Well, it's actually pretty simple. These trees aren't really the problem. They are part of the problem, but the real problem really is virtual shadow maps. And you can actually see it here if I go ahead, go to my project settings and search for shadow map. Something that Unreal Engine by default has activated is virtual shadow maps. Now if I go ahead and tick on shadow maps, my performance is going to be pretty much way better, and that's because while virtual shadow maps are way prettier, I could definitely see the problem is that currently we're using a lot of foliage that don't have any nanite functionality, or we can't use nanite on them yet because of nanite's strict requirements of not using mass transparency like all the foliage is here, so we can't use it on these grass, and I think that's definitely the thing that hurts virtual shadow maps, because if I actually go ahead and open my GPU visualizer and I go to the scene rendering, you can see the thing that takes up the most rendering time is the shadow depths. Now, the intensity of how intense the virtual shadow maps are is based on how your light source is laid out. So if your light source is making the object create large stretching shadows, then virtual shadow maps will just perform worse. But in the case where the shadows are pretty short and are seen, it is definitely way faster than it usually should be. But I think I can chalk that up to just not using enough nanite foliage. Or not nanite foliage, just overall not using enough stuff that are nanite compatible. And I think that's going to be solved with UE when it actually allows more objects to use nanite. But currently in the early access, and I believe in the 5.0 main build on GitHub, it isn't working well yet. I might be wrong. I think it's 5.1 that actually added support for transparency or translucency. I'm not really sure, but in the current situation, we can't actually let these foliage use nanites. The only way we could be able to do that is by actually going ahead, going in Blender and actually modeling the blades of grass and letting nanite do its thing. But of course, the way it's laid out now, we can't use nanite, and I think that's the thing I can attribute to very bad performance of shadows. If you want pretty or better performance, you can just turn off shadow maps and go ahead and bake your shadows and then work with that. That produces a pretty good frame rate still, and even with Lumen it works pretty well. But I'm fine with this, considering virtual shadow maps is practically a high-end thing, right? It's made for higher end of computers, and I don't have the highest end specs in the world right now with my graphics card. I have more mid-end card. Some people might consider it low-end, but yeah, it isn't a high-end graphics card, so I understand why virtual shadow maps won't perform as well. But if you don't want virtual shadow maps, you can just go ahead and turn it off and then bake your shadows, and you're gonna have way better performance. But in my case, I'm pretty happy with this. You can see some of these grass parts aren't reacting to shadow, but honestly it isn't too noticeable. It's something you have to look at. But if you really don't want these to stick out, you can actually go ahead to your grass type and just scale these down, the plants that are actually using not using the dynamic shadow, so that they're smaller and then they blend in way easier in between, because the further away grass is still pretty large, so sometimes it sticks out like a sore thumb, and you can definitely just fix that by scaling down the far grass so that it isn't so big, so that it isn't obvious they aren't using shadows. Yeah, that's it for this episode. The next part is gonna be me actually fixing up this foliage. I'm gonna be talking about using Unreal Engine's AutoLOD system, or Auto LOD, which will actually help us clean up this grass and probably reduce its draw counts as well, which would be very awesome. But also something that we can do is we're also going to go ahead and color the grass based on where it is on the landscape. So grass will be darker on darker parts of the landscape, and grass will be lighter on lighter parts of the landscape. And yeah, it's just stuff like that. The next video isn't gonna be the next part in the landscape tutorial series. It's gonna be something else that I really want to do. It's gonna take a bit of a while to film, but yeah, that's generally it for this. I'm just glad this year is over. It's been a really long year with a couple of setbacks. But yeah, without further ado, guys, thanks for watching. If you like the content, please subscribe. Hit like if you liked the video, hit dislike if you didn't. And yeah, that's it for now. Goodbye, everybody.